So yesterday, somebody made another comment. Actually, the same person made a comment on my video, and he didn't seem to understand the timeline of the events of the Legendarium. So today I'm going to do a timeline video where I put everything in order for every character. So we're going to start with Sauron. So Sauron, at the end of the First Age, after the defeat of Morgoth, and when Morgoth is taken to Valinor, never to come back again, Sauron begs to repent to the Valar, and essentially he convinces them that he's forsaken his evil ways, so they kind of let him go, and then they expect him to come back to Valinor with them, but he runs away. That's what happens at the end of the First Age. Now we can go and I can talk to you about what Sauron does in the Second Age. So Sauron is a massive driving force in the Second Age. The first thing that happens with Sauron is in the year 500 of the Second Age, he comes out of hiding. So he waits 500 years before he comes out of hiding. Then at the year 1000, he's building Barad-dûr. And then at the year 1200, he deceives the Noldor and goes to Eregion. But some Noldor lords, like Galadriel and Gil-galad, sees through his evil. Because Sauron didn't show up like the huge metal Sauron that we see in the prologue of Lord of the Rings. He shows up as like, I'm a nice looking, pretty, beautiful elf-like person that lies about being a Maiar. That's good. So in the year 1200, he shows up. They kick him out. Then he goes to see Celebrimbor. 300 years later, he's established with Celebrimbor, and they start working on the Rings of Power. 100 years later, Celebrimbor sees Sauron's treachery and kicks him out. And the Maiar send Glorfindel to try to deal with Sauron. They send him from, silence him from Valinor to kind of contain the situation. And then, by 693, the war between the elves and Sauron begins. And the three elvish rings are hidden. So this is by 1693. By 1700, Sauron has destroyed Eriador. He's captured most of the important elves, and he's besieging both Lindon and Rivendell. Celebrimbor is already dead. Celebrimbor dies 3 years earlier in 1697. And Elrond has to run away, establish Rivendell. So, like, things are going really quickly now. Quickly for elves. The next event that happens is the intervention of the Numenorians. So, now we're going to switch to the Numenorians. This is an image of Isildur. I like this art image. Sam Wart is really good at drawing this. He does capture the character fairly well. So remember when I said that Sauron destroys Eriador in 1700? Now we cut to like the last part of the Second Age. So Isildur is born in 3209 of the Second Age. So he's born literally almost 1,300 years after the destruction of the Elvish realms of Eregion. And then what happens is 50 years after Isildur's birth, Alfarazon goes to Middle-earth with his army, with his huge army, and he captures Sauron. Because when he arrived, none of Sauron's minions dared oppose the host of Numenor, because they had essentially most Numenorians. That's another thing that's really badly shown in the show, is most Numenorians are very powerful. They're essentially maybe stronger than Aragorn, taller than Aragorn, and quicker than Aragorn. Like Numenorians, they have the willpower to say no to Sauron. Tolkien wrote in one of his letters, I don't remember which one, he was like, Sauron was in a room with Aragorn, and Aragorn had the ring, and Aragorn had the Flame of the West in one hand and the ring in the other, and Sauron politely asked him to give him the ring. Aragorn would not have the willpower to keep the ring for himself. 1,300 years after the defeat of Celebrimbor and his death, Sauron is defeated by Numenor and Isildur is born. And then Sauron slowly corrupts the will of the Numenorians and really corrupts them. Like 20 years after Sauron's arrival, he convinces the Numenorians to attack Valinor. So they take their 300,000 men host and they land on Valinor. And essentially, Iluvatar intervenes at that point because such a host actually posed a threat to Valinor, and he destroys Alfarazon and all his fleet and all his men, and then he raises the island of Numenor. This happens 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years after the forging of the rings. So these events that we see happening in the show at the same time happen uh, at almost in a different age. Like the forging of the rings of power happens in the first third of the second age, and the destruction and intervention of Numenor happens in the last third of the second age. So then we have the War of the Last Alliance. Sauron, well, he attacks like the realms that are run by Isildur and his father Elendil, and eventually they destroy Sauron, and then it's the end of the second age. So the second age ends. Then in the third age, at the year 1000, 1,000 years after, because Isildur dies in the second year of the third age. He dies really quickly. You can see this in the prologue of Lord of the Rings. He's taking his armies through some shitty marshland near the mouth of the Anduin, like the place where the hobbits lived in the second age. And he's shot by orcs and he dies and he loses the ring in the river. And then long after that, like I think 1,000 or 2,000 years after that, Gollum finds a ring. But the thing is, 1,000 years after Isildur's death, the wizards arrive to Middle-earth. So in this show, we saw Isildur alive, Sauron revealed, and the arrival of the wizards at some date in the second age, which is not given. And at the same time, we saw all of these events, and these events happen in two different ages and in two different parts of the same age. So it's kind of a confusing mess. But the thing is, then we can talk about Galadriel, because Galadriel also is completely fucked by this show, because all her motivations are completely, because like the guy that left the comment, he was like, but what did Galadriel do? Did she just stand the fuck around and do nothing? Like, and the answer is no. She had things to do in the second age. At the end of the first age, Galadriel chooses to remain in Middle-earth with like most of the Noldor High Lords. So in the second age, Galadriel, who's already married, with her husband, who's been completely like retconned out of the show. They create a realm which they rule, which is called Lindon, and they rule it as vassals of Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor. And they have a daughter, which has been cut from the show, and eventually they move from Lindon and they go to live in Eregion, which is nearer to Khazad-dûm. So they have a very good relationship with the dwarves of Khazad-dûm. So they don't. So they, what happens is a show where like their diplomatic relationship with the dwarves is bad does not happen, and like pretty much like everything, like, because the thing is, the dwarves Khazad-dûm are like a certain type of dwarves, and the leader of the dwarves Khazad-dûm, which is sometimes called Durin, he has, well, he is Durin reborn. He's the same dwarf. Like, they have a song called the Song of Durin that talks about the first life of Durin, and the thing is, Durin, when he is reborn, he remembers the life of all the other dwarves named Durin that came before. And the thing is, Durin reborn, essentially, he could not mislike elves that much, simply because the elves, because he fought with the elves against Morgoth for so long and so many of his lives, he couldn't possibly hate them. So there's also like the setting up of the setting up of Lothlorien, and eventually the relationship between the elves of Eregion and the dwarves of Khazad-dûm is so good that when Celebrimbor takes over the rule of Eregion, Galadriel and her family leaves and they cross through the mines of Khazad-dûm. Actually, she takes the same course as the Fellowship of the Ring. She crosses Khazad-dûm and then she arrives in Lothlorien on the other side. So another important thing she does, despite like, because I would have thought that we would have had a show where we see Galadriel. She's brought into. We see her in Eregion with like Gil-galad and Celebrimbor, and we see these people like we see these people rule and they have court intrigue and they have like well we see kind of a political show with Galadriel because that's what she does. She's a politician essentially, and also like when Sauron shows up, he pretends to be Maya Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. That's kind of funny, but like but what happens is when she shows up, Galadriel and Galad both mistrust him immediately and tell Celebrimbor that he's evil like. And what happens is immediately when Celebrimbor realizes his mistake, he gives her a ring of power also, which she will use after Sauron loses his ring to do whatever the hell she wants with it. And but the thing is, even the ring is not meant to like is not really like a very powerful weapon. Like it's made to protect you from evil and to hide from evil, to preserve you from evil. So like it has nothing to do with fighting with swords. And also, what is quite funny is that like uh, Galadriel, who already has a daughter at the time, her daughter marries Elrond, and so she's the grandmother-in-law of like Aragorn, and she's the grandmother of Arwen. So it's kind of important for her to have children. Her children are very important for the rest of the series, but you can see her husband no longer exists because I think she married her husband in the First Age, and her husband is completely retconned from the show. Like he's gone, completely gone. The thing is, we she has thousands of years to get all the pieces of her life going, but in the show they just skip over everything. So this, I hope this was informative uh, about timeline of the Second Age and our characters from the show. And if you like this video and you've watched it this long, which is kind of improbable because I have the impression that nobody ever watches to the end, I'm thanking you very much from the bottom of my heart. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys later. If you have any questions or any comments or you want any information, just ask, and I'll do a video on the topic. Because this video was done for only like one person who only gives negative comments to my videos. So if you have actually positive comments, I'll be very happy to talk with you and answer you. And if you have any questions on the Legendarium, just ask away. And thank you.